Hello and welcome. I'm Eric Gao, and here's what happened this week. We begin with the biggest story around the world. Friday marked a full year since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. Our reporter Rick Glowert has been in Lviv for the past week, covering the anniversary. He filed this report on the significance of the last year.
Is all that's left of Bakhmut, a city once home to 80,000 people in eastern Ukraine. It's here that the longest battle of the Russian invasion is being fought. There are still residents hiding in the rubble of this city. 1 year into the war, Ukrainians here and across the country are still pushing back against their occupiers. In February last year, Russian President Vladimir Putin planned to take the capital, Kyiv, within 3 days. Ukraine was then looking to join the European Union and angling for a place in NATO. Red lines for the Russian president.
Но Россия не может чувствовать себя в безопасности, развиваться, существовать с постоянной угрозой, исходящей с территории современной Украины.
But Putin's forces are now bogged down in the country's east, and Ukraine's fight for freedom has become the world's battle. The international community has responded with humanitarian aid, sanctions on Russia, and weapons including heavy artillery and, most recently, tanks. Taiwan, a world leader in semiconductors, halted exports of sophisticated chips to Moscow and promised $50 million to help rebuild Ukraine. Leaders of the Western world have visited the besieged capital Kyiv and met with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Most recently, a surprise visit by US President Joe Biden.
Putin thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. As you know, Mr. President, I said to you in the beginning, he's counting on us not sticking together. He was counting on the inability to keep NATO united. He was counting on us not to be able to bring in others on the side of Ukraine. He thought he could outlast us. I don't think he's thinking that right now.
No matter who stands together with Kyiv, it is Ukraine's people that are suffering. The war has caused the greatest humanitarian crisis to hit Europe in decades. Putin's invasion has left 8,000 civilians dead and forced more than 8 million from their homes. A year in, and thousands of displaced people are still arriving in cities like Lviv, western Ukraine, fleeing the horrors of war in the east. Through those horrors, President Zelensky has filled the role of a strong and charismatic leader, ever championing his country's cause on the world stage and rallying his people. On the eve of the one-year anniversary of the war, he remained steadfast.
Схід дуже важко, болісно, але робимо все, щоб вистояти. Південь. На частині напрямків ситуація доволі небезпечна, але нашим воїнам є чим і як відповідати окупанту.
Ukraine has surprised the world with its determination to defend its freedom with everything it's got. But Putin appears equally determined in his war of attrition. And if the battle rages for another year, how will any part of Ukraine remain unscathed? Rick Glowert in Lviv, Ukraine, for TaiwanPlus.
To fight against Russia's invasion, more than 20,000 volunteers from countries around the world have joined Ukraine's armed forces, including several Taiwanese fighters. Rick also had this report on what drives these individuals to fight for freedom 8,000 kilometers from home.
Mourners line the streets of Lviv, western Ukraine, paying their respects to 2 local soldiers who died fighting Russian forces. One of the men, who was killed in the eastern Donetsk region, was just 20 years old. As the war enters its second year, memorials like this are being held every day in Lviv. Just a few months ago, the city honoured Jonathan Zung, a 25-year-old volunteer fighter from halfway around the world. He was among a handful of people from Taiwan to fight in Ukraine, and the only one known to be killed in action.
Цілою нашою спільнотою дякували за те, що він подолав тисячі кілометрів, щоб боротися на стороні добра, боротися проти зла. І тому низький уклін і велика подяка.
More than 20,000 fighters from abroad have come to Ukraine, typically serving for a few months. At least 23 of them have died. The war here and Ukrainians' determination to defend their sovereignty has moved people from all around the world to the point that they've made this fight their own, willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to fend off Russia's invasion. Jonathan Sung's death, 8,000 kilometers from his home, has forced Taiwan to consider what the price of freedom is and who should pay the cost. Taiwan is dealing with a similar existential risk to that facing Ukraine. Neighbouring China has recently upped threats to take Taiwan by force, seeing the island nation as a part of its territory. 34-year-old waiter Lu Zihao is now back in Taipei after fighting in Ukraine for 3 months last year.
那个时候台湾也没什么事啊，没有疫情，什么都没有，然后乌克兰这么可怜，我们就去帮助别人，对啊，我就想没有特别啦，就是帮助别人。
Taiwan is growing more aware that it too one day may need help. China has been increasingly sending military boats and planes into the area around Taiwan. Taiwan has boosted spending on defense and increased mandatory military service.
台湾本身就应该了解，世界各国都应该要更了解，对吧？而且台湾是高风险，就是中国每天在我们这边，每天飞机就飞过来，对啊，什么时候开打都不知道，对啊，老实讲，对啊，因为我觉得提高意识吧，国防意识真的要提高。
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has devastated this country, and it's also sent a clear message to Taiwan that an invasion by an aggressive neighbour is possible, and that the price of protecting a nation's freedom has a very human cost. Rick Lowett in Lviv, Ukraine for TaiwanPlus.
The war in Ukraine has brought up many comparisons with Taiwan, which is also facing a military threat from a larger neighbor. As Taiwan works to build up its defenses, U.S. media is reporting that Washington plans to deploy between 100 and 200 troops to Taiwan in the coming months. Our reporter Jaime Ocon has this update.
Over 100 U.S. troops may soon be on their way to Taiwan. That's according to a report by the Wall Street Journal. It would be the largest deployment of U.S. troops to Taiwan since Washington broke off diplomatic relations in the 1970s. The report cited officials close to the matter, who say that the expansion of forces is part of a training program designed to enhance the combat readiness of Taiwanese troops. The news comes as China continues its military pressure around Taiwan. On Friday, Taiwan's defense ministry reported that in a span of 24 hours, 37 Chinese warplanes and 6 naval ships were operating around the country. Of that group, 12 planes entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone. And although this space isn't the country's sovereign territory, it's used as a buffer zone for military purposes. The latest news of U.S.-Taiwan military cooperation comes just days after reports that Taiwan's military would send almost 500 troops to the U.S. for training. Defense officials say it's all part of an effort to bolster Taiwan's combat readiness. Patrick Chen and Jaime Ocon for TaiwanPlus.
For more on the significance of U.S.-Taiwan military exchanges, Jaime spoke to Blake Herzinger, a security expert at the American Enterprise Institute based in Singapore.
Can you talk about the significance of U.S. troops in Taiwan helping to train Taiwan soldiers?
I think the first thing to consider is that this is not new. This is an expansion of an activity that was already occurring and has been since at least 2022. Now, the significance of U.S. forces in Taiwan can never be necessarily understated. It is generally inflammatory toward cross-strait relations and U.S.-China relations. This is a high point of tensions between the U.S. and China. Xi Jinping going to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin. The U.S. is threatening to release intelligence regarding Chinese plans to start feeding weapons into the Ukraine war on Russia's side. So geopolitically, this placed into context is another inflammatory piece of kind of what's happening regionally.
This report is highlighting that the United States will help Taiwan with tactics and weapons that could deter a Chinese invasion. What are these tactics?
Taiwan once had a defense plan called the Overall Defense Concept, which called for a more asymmetric approach to defending their island, which would be more in line with this kind of porcupine strategy. Now, what we saw before that and presently is more of an emphasis on high-dollar, high-technology items like the Abrams tank, manned fighter jets, things like the indigenous submarine program. Now, these are not necessarily in step with an asymmetric plan for defending Taiwan. However, with U.S. inclusions in the last National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 23, there are a number of provisions in there for how the United States might better provide Taiwan with weapons to defend itself. And if the U.S. has those capabilities to provide weapons instead of relying on the old way of waiting for Taiwan to buy from the United States, now we can provide. that gives the U.S. more opportunities for shaping and maybe directing Taiwan back to that more asymmetric approach that fits a better plan for both to engage with.
We've seen an increase in U.S. presence in Japan, the Philippines, and now Taiwan in the coming months. What does this say about the U.S.'s shift to Asia and trying to ensure security in the region?
So what I think is the real important piece here is that regional allies are bringing the United States in more. Because, the United States, as you mentioned, this pivot to Asia, we've been trying that since 2008 with limited success. We've had regional partners like Philippines flirting with Beijing throughout that entire period. The U.S.-Philippines alliance was on kind of a rocky foundation. And now you see President Marcos saying it would be very difficult for us to remain outside of a U.S.-China conflict over Taiwan, and now pulling closer to their traditional security ally, the United States, and allowing that access into the northern reaches of Philippines. Japan doing the same, aggressively changing their defense footing to prepare for what they see as a very real possibility of conflict in their region over Taiwan.
That was Jaime Ocon speaking with Blake Herzinger from the American Enterprise Institute in Singapore. And wrapping up with a sweeter story, bubble tea is Taiwan's national drink, and it's become a worldwide hit. In Lithuania, a chain of bubble tea stores has been fostering a love for this uniquely Taiwanese treat. Leslie Liao was in the country's capital, Vilnius, to learn how the chain found success with locals.
Taiwan and Lithuania are over 8,000 kilometers apart. And while ties between the two countries are improving, they're still in early development. So you don't expect to see many Taiwanese things in Lithuania and vice versa. But not 50 meters from the hotel we're staying at, TaiwanPlus was greeted with a very familiar sight, Formosa Tea, a place that serves, you guessed it, Taiwan's national drink, bubble tea.
Formosa Tea opened its first store in 2016 in Lithuania's capital, Vilnius. Since then, it's expanded to over a dozen stores in 5 cities. Owners Avitas and Jeffrey met while studying in the United States.
I said, Jeffrey, why don't you come to Lithuania and we do bubble tea, because it's very popular in America, it's popular in the United Kingdom, in some other European countries, and there is none in Lithuania, so let's do it.
Jeffrey is the Taiwanese know-how behind the operation. When Formosa Tea first started, he insisted on bringing customers an authentic Taiwanese experience. The store imported both equipment and ingredients from Taiwan. But the product still needed to be adjusted to meet Lithuanian tastes.
刚开始我们想要就是提供比较 authentic 那种很原味的台湾味给当地客人，但是就是做了一段时间发现有部分客人能接受，但绝大部分还是有他们自己 prefer 的口味。
One change they made was introducing alternatives to traditional tapioca pearls. Locals found their chewiness a little strange at first. Formosa Tea adapted to its surroundings and won over Lithuanian hearts and minds.
I like the flavors. It's nice, nice and sweet.
I already know what it is. I liked it last time, so I just bought. Now we have loyalty card and, and coming here very often.
And for Taiwanese living in Lithuania like Lila Yo, Formosa Tea is a great way to share their culture with local colleagues and friends.
So if people want to know what do you have, what kind of what do you Taiwanese people eat? Is it the same like Chinese or something? I usually will say, do you know about bubble tea? That's from Taiwan. That's the classic thing we have. And there's a shop called Formosa, that's from Taiwan.
Bubble tea has made it big in Lithuania, though with a few tweaks to cater to local taste buds. But judging by how many Formosa tea stores there are in the country, it's doing a good job. And for travelers like me who need a regular dose of bubble tea, it sure hits the spot. Leon Lien and Leslie Liao in Vilnius, Lithuania for TaiwanPlus News.
Thank you for watching Here's What Happened. Remember to download the TaiwanPlus app for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, check out these shots I took of cherry blossoms in bloom in the heart of Taipei. I'm Eric Gao. Take care and see you next time.